Okay, so you've given us quite a collection of materials this time.
Yeah.
A nursing course outline, a PowerPoint presentation, looks pretty detailed, and some anatomy and physiology review notes.
Right.
So basically, it looks like we're doing a deep dive into the world of hematology.
Yeah, it really does touch on everything, kind of from soup to nuts.
Blood, that is.
Blood, that's right.
Okay.
So we've got like the basic building blocks of what makes up blood,
Right.
what each of those components do,
Yeah.
and then all the way through kind of the different conditions that affect all of these different components, like low platelet counts, we call that thrombocytopenia.
Right.
Low white blood cells, that's neutropenia.
Okay.
Different kinds of anemia.
Got it.
And even the inherited bleeding disorders, so like the hemophilias and von Willebrand's disease.
Got it.
And then very importantly, how blood products are administered.
Right. So all the ins and outs of transfusions and things like that.
Exactly.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So for this deep dive, mission is let's extract all the good stuff about what makes up your blood, what all those parts do, what can go wrong with this very intricate system, and how we go about treating those things.
Right.
And we'll focus on blood transfusions, when they're needed, how they work, and the different kinds of anemia.
Right.
What does that sound?
That sounds perfect. That covers everything that's in this material.
Good. And hopefully it'll be nice and clear for our listener.
Absolutely.
Let's start with the components of blood.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, blood isn't just a simple red fluid, right?
Right.
It's actually a specialized type of connective tissue.
Okay.
And we can kind of think of it like a river flowing through your body.
Okay.
And in this river, there's different kinds of cells and all these important substances, all suspended in a fluid called plasma.
Got it.
Plasma is going to make up a little over half of your blood volume, about 55%.
Okay.
And it's mostly water, but it also contains a whole host of things, right? You've got essential proteins, electrolytes. And those electrolytes are going to be very important for your nerve and your muscle function.
Got it.
We've got dissolved gases, nutrients to feed your cells, and waste products that are on their way out.
Right.
So it really is the delivery truck for everything in your bloodstream.
Right. It's a very efficient delivery system.
It is.
Okay, so we've got the plasma, and then making up the other 45% of blood are the actual blood cells.
That's right.
And those are the real workers in the system.
Exactly.
So we've got erythrocytes, which most people know as red blood cells, or RBCs, and their main job is all about transporting oxygen.
That's right.
Okay. And then we have leukocytes, which are white blood cells, or WBCs, and they are the body's, defense against infection.
Yes.
And then finally, we've got thrombocytes, more commonly known as platelets.
Right.
And they're all about stopping bleeding.
Exactly.
So they're very important.
Important.
Now, all of these components work together to perform these absolutely vital functions. So blood plays a key role in protection.
It does.
Obviously through clotting, but also through immune responses.
Right. Yeah.
It's essential for regulation. It's keeping that delicate balance of fluids and electrolytes. It's keeping your acid-base levels correct, controlling core body temperature, even the pressure within your blood vessels. It's working very hard to keep everything, balanced.
Yeah, very hard.
And then, of course, we can't forget transportation, right?
Right.
So the blood is like an amazing highway system, right?
Exactly.
So it picks up oxygen in the lungs, delivers it to every single cell in the body.
Right.
It transports nutrients from the digestive system, after you eat. It carries hormones from the endocrine glands to where they need to act. And it ferries metabolic waste products.
Right.
Like carbon dioxide to the lungs to be exhaled and urea to the kidneys for removal. So it really is quite a complex network.
It is a complex network, and it's working all the time.
All the time. So let's zoom in on those erythrocytes, the red blood cells.
Okay.
Their primary role is transporting oxygen, carbon dioxide.
Yes.
And they achieve this with the help of hemoglobin.
Right. That's their main component.
Yeah.
So each hemoglobin molecule has iron.
Okay.
It's a very specific part of that hemoglobin molecule. It's called hemin.
Okay.
And this iron is what actually binds with the oxygen in your lungs.
Got it.
And then as the red blood cells travel throughout the body, they release that oxygen to the tissues where it's needed.
Amazing.
And carbon dioxide, which is a waste product of cellular metabolism, it then attaches to a different part of that hemoglobin molecule.
Okay.
It's called the globin portion.
Got it.
And it hitches a ride back to the lungs to be exhaled.
That is so fascinating. They even play a role in regulating the acid-base balance, which is amazing given how tiny these cells are.
They're amazing little cells.
And their unique shape, it's biconcave. It's kind of like, a flattened disc with indentations on both sides.
Yeah. Exactly.
Along with their flexible cell membrane, allows them to squeeze through even the tiniest capillaries, right?
Right.
Making sure that oxygen can reach every part of your tissues.
Yes.
Okay, so these red blood cells are constantly being used up. So where do they actually come from in the first place?
Okay, well, that's where erythropoiesis comes in.
Right.
So erythropoiesis is just a fancy term for the process of making new red blood cells.
Got it.
And this happens primarily in your bone marrow,
Okay.
which is that spongy tissue inside of some of your larger bones.
Right.
So what kicks off this whole process of erythropoiesis?
Yeah, what's the trigger?
Yeah, it's usually a signal that's coming from your body that the oxygen levels in your blood are getting low, and we call this hypoxia.
Okay.
And your kidneys, they're very sensitive to oxygen levels.
Right.
And when they detect this hypoxia,
Yeah.
they release a hormone called erythropoietin.
Right. EPO.
Exactly. And it travels to the bone marrow and acts like a signal telling it to increase the production of those red blood cells. So it's a really elegant feedback loop.
So almost like a thermostat in your house, where when the temperature drops below a certain point, the thermostat tells the furnace, hey, we need to heat things up. And in this case, the low oxygen triggers the release of erythropoietin, which tells the bone marrow, hey, let's make more red blood cells.
That's a great analogy.
I try. So just like any factory, this erythropoiesis needs those raw materials.
It does.
So,
So what are those?
well, it includes amino acids, and you get those from the protein in your diet.
Okay.
And those are essential for building that hemoglobin molecule and the red blood cell membrane itself.
Okay.
You need B vitamins like vitamin B12 and folate, and those are crucial for DNA synthesis, and the proper maturation of the red blood cells.
Okay.
Copper is another important component.
Okay.
It helps your body to mobilize those iron stores. And then, of course, iron. Iron is essential because it's at the core of the oxygen-carrying part of hemoglobin.
Right.
And then lastly, vitamin C and E also contribute to this process. Got it. And it's amazing when you see it all laid out like that, how interconnected everything is. Like you think about maybe vitamin deficiencies.
Right.
And you think, oh, like you're not getting enough vitamin C, you're going to get scurvy
Right.
or whatever. But the fact that it can really impact your oxygen carrying capacity
Absolutely.
really highlights how everything has to work together in this very delicate balance.
Everything has to work together, yes.
Okay, so let's talk more about iron, because I know that's a big one when it comes to blood health and iron deficiency. How does the body actually handle all the iron that we take in?
Okay, so iron metabolism is a very tightly regulated process.
Okay.
The majority of iron absorption happens in the duodenum and jejunum, which are parts of your small intestine.
Okay.
And the type of iron that you consume actually makes a difference.
Really?
Yeah, so heme iron, which comes from animal products like meat, is much more easily absorbed
Okay.
than non-heme iron,
Got it.
which is found in your plant-based foods.
So if you're getting your iron primarily from, beans and lentils and things like that, your body might not be absorbing all of it.
Exactly, exactly. The non-heme iron actually needs to be converted into a more absorbable form
Oh, okay.
before your gut can take it up.
Got it.
And a key player in regulating how much iron we absorb is a hormone called hepcidin,
Okay.
and it's produced by the liver.
Okay.
Hepcidin is kind of like the gatekeeper of iron absorption.
Okay.
So when your iron levels are high, hepcidin levels go up. And that tells your gut, hey, absorb less iron.
Okay.
Conversely, when your iron levels are low, hepcidin decreases.
Okay.
So now you're allowed more absorption.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's very smart. It prevents both deficiency and iron overload.
So it's constantly monitoring what's going on and making sure that things don't get out of whack.
Exactly.
That's incredible. So once it's absorbed, what happens to the iron?
Okay, so once it's absorbed, the iron is transported in your bloodstream by a protein called transferrin. Transferrin kind of acts like a shuttle service.
Okay.
It carries the iron to where it's needed the most, so primarily the bone marrow, right?
Right. To make new red blood cells.
Exactly. But also to other tissues like the liver and the spleen for storage.
Got it.
Inside the cells, iron is stored in a protein complex called ferritin.
Okay.
Another storage form is hemosiderin, and it's kind of like a longer-term reserve.
Okay.
And this is if your iron levels are particularly high.
Okay.
But the main use of iron, like we discussed, is in hemoglobin.
Right.
So that's within red blood cells.
Right.
And of course, we lose iron every day in small amounts
Okay.
through shedding skin cells, in the gastrointestinal tract, and of course in women during menstruation.
Right.
So this ongoing loss kind of highlights the importance of consistently getting enough iron in your diet.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, moving on to the other main types of blood cells, the leukocytes. So the white blood cells, these are our immune system in action, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Our immune system ready to protect us at all times.
Constantly working to protect us.
Constantly working, yes.
So they're broadly divided into two main categories.
That's right.
Granulocytes and agranulocytes.
Yeah, and that's based on whether they have visible granules in their cytoplasm when you look at them under a microscope.
Okay, so granulocytes, think of them as like the immediate responders.
Yes, exactly.
And they've got, grenades ready to fight off invaders.
Exactly. And those granules, they contain enzymes and other substances that are going to help fight off those invaders.
Right, so that includes neutrophils, which are like the first ones on the scene during a bacterial infection.
Right.
Eosinophils, which are going to be big players when it comes to combating parasites.
Yes.
And allergic reactions.
That's right.
And then finally, basophils, which release histamine.
Right.
And other chemicals involved in inflammation and allergic responses.
That's right.
So then the agranulocytes lack those prominent granules.
Yes, they do.
And they consist of the lymphocytes and monocytes.
What?
Okay, so lymphocytes, these are the more, sophisticated, specialized intelligence units of your adaptive immune system.
Yes, exactly.
So that includes the T cells, which are going to directly attack infected or cancerous cells.
That's right.
And B cells, which are going to produce antibodies to target specific pathogens.
Exactly.
Then the monocytes, they circulate in the blood, and then they mature into macrophages when they enter the tissues.
Yes.
So the macrophages are like the Pac-Man of the immune system.
Yes, exactly.
Right. They're engulfing and digesting, pathogens, cellular debris.
Exactly. They're the big eaters.
So just to recap quickly, you've got the neutrophils, first responders to bacterial infections, eosinophils, allergies and parasites, basophils, more involved in that inflammatory and allergic process. Lymphocytes are about that targeted, specific immune response, right? And monocytes are like the cleanup crew, but they also can activate other immune cells.
That is a great summary of their roles. Yes.
I am to please. And then we have the thrombocytes,
Yes.
the platelets, and they are all about initiating that blood clotting process.
Right, that's their main job.
Right, which is so essential. So when an injury occurs, the platelets are attracted to the site.
That's right.
They stick to the damaged vessel wall.
Right.
And they become activated.
Yes.
And start to clump together,
right,
forming a physical barrier, which we call a platelet plug.
Exactly.
And their production is stimulated by a hormone called thrombopoietin, which is primarily produced in the liver.
Right.
So that initial platelet plug is just the first step.
It is.
We still need that more complex coagulation cascade to really seal the deal and create a stable clot.
Exactly.
So what's going on there?
So the coagulation cascade is, it's very complex, but very highly regulated series of biochemical reactions.
Okay.
Involving what we call clotting factors, which are proteins that circulate in your blood in an inactive state.
Right.
But when a blood vessel is injured, those factors are activated.
Okay.
And they're activated in a very specific sequence. So it's broadly divided into three phases.
Okay.
You've got the vascular phase, and this is where the injured blood vessel constricts, reducing blood flow.
Makes sense.
Then we've got the formation of the platelet plug, which we just discussed.
Right.
And then the activation of those clotting factors, and that's through two pathways.
Okay.
The intrinsic and the extrinsic pathway.
Got it.
But these two pathways, they eventually converge.
Okay.
Leading to the activation of factor X.
Okay.
Factor X then plays a very crucial role in converting prothrombin into thrombin.
Okay.
And then thrombin converts fibrinogen, a soluble protein in the plasma, into fibrin.
Okay.
Which is an insoluble thread-like protein that forms a mesh.
Okay.
And this fibrin mesh, it reinforces the platelet plug, creating a much stronger and more stable blood clot that effectively seals that injury.
Wow.
And importantly, this process, again, very complex, is controlled by natural anticoagulants,
Okay.
which circulate in your blood. And that's going to prevent excessive or inappropriate clotting. So it's a really finely tuned system.
It's amazing to me all the checks and balances that are in place to make sure that things don't go wrong in either direction. So not enough clotting or too much.
That's right.
Okay, so there's one more organ that we should talk about in terms of its role in blood, and that is the spleen.
Okay.
And I think a lot of people don't always think about the spleen when they're thinking about, hematology.
Right.
But it seems to have some pretty important functions.
Absolutely.
So what's the spleen's role?
So the spleen, which is located in that upper left part of your abdomen, has several key roles related to blood.
Okay.
During fetal development, it actually plays a part in the production of red blood cells.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but after birth, its primary function shifts.
Okay.
So after birth, it acts as a very efficient filter for your blood.
Okay.
So it's going to be removing old or damaged red blood cells, helping to recycle that iron that's contained in those red blood cells. So it can be reused to make new blood cells.
Okay.
It also filters out bacteria, other foreign particles, playing a role in your body's defense.
Okay.
The spleen is also involved in immunity by housing lymphocytes and monocytes.
Right.
And it's a site where antibodies are produced.
Got it.
And lastly, it acts as a storage site for platelets and red blood cells.
Wow. Okay.
So it's a really versatile organ.
Yeah, it's like a recycling center for old blood cells, and then like a key outpost for the immune system, and a reserve tank for platelets and RBCs, all rolled into one.
Absolutely.
That's fascinating.
Yep.
Okay, that gives us a really good, foundational understanding of what blood's all about.
Yeah, it does.
Now, let's move on to, I think, a topic that is very crucial, especially in a healthcare setting.
Right.
And that is blood transfusions. When are those actually needed?
Okay, so blood transfusions are indicated in a wide variety of situations, but they're basically used when your body's either experienced a significant loss of blood or when its ability to produce essential blood components is compromised.
Okay.
So this can include substantial blood loss during or after surgical procedures.
Okay.
Following traumatic injuries that lead to hemorrhage.
Makes sense.
Cases of significant gastrointestinal bleeding.
Right.
So from things like ulcers in patients with cancer, they may develop anemia from the malignancy itself.
Yeah.
Or as a side effect of treatments like chemotherapy, which suppresses bone marrow function.
Right.
Transfusions are also used in individuals with organ dysfunction. So anything that might be affecting red blood cell production.
Got it.
Like in chronic kidney disease.
Yeah.
Where the kidneys may not produce enough erythropoietin.
Yeah.
And then lastly, for those with inherited bleeding disorders.
Right.
Who may need transfusions of specific clotting factors or platelets.
Got it. So it's not just like a, generic blood transfusion.
No.
Right.
It's not.
There are different types of blood products that can be transfused depending on the need.
Right.
It's not one size fits all.
Not at all. So we have packed red blood cells. We often call them PRBCs.
Okay.
And those are used to treat anemia or blood loss by increasing that oxygen carrying capacity.
Okay.
Then there's plasma, which is the liquid portion of blood without the cells.
Right.
And that's transfused to restore blood volume, improve blood clotting by giving those essential clotting factors.
Right.
And replenishing other important proteins.
Okay.
Platelets are given to patients who have low platelet counts or who have clotting disorders to prevent or control bleeding.
Got it.
And then lastly, albumin, which is a major protein found in plasma.
Okay.
It helps to maintain blood volume and blood pressure. It's used in things like severe hypoalbuminemia.
Okay.
That's low albumin levels, edema, and certain types of shock.
Okay, now one really critical aspect of blood transfusions is compatibility.
Yes, that's very important.
So we've all heard about the different blood types, AB, and O.
Right. And the RH factor, whether you're positive or negative.
Right.
So can you break that down for us?
Sure. So ABO compatibility, it's based on the presence or absence of very specific antigens on the surface of your red blood cells.
Okay.
So think of these antigens like ID badges on the surface of those red blood cells.
Okay.
So if you have type A blood, your red blood cells have A antigens.
Right.
And your plasma contains antibodies that will attack type B blood cells.
Okay.
If you have type B blood, your red blood cells have B antigens, and your plasma contains antibodies that will attack type A blood cells.
Okay.
Type AB blood, it's interesting, the red blood cells have both A and B antigens,
Okay.
but the plasma doesn't contain any anti-A or anti-B antibodies.
Okay.
So that's why people with type AB blood are considered universal recipients.
Yeah.
They can get blood from anyone.
Got it.
And finally, type O red blood cells have neither A nor B antigens.
Okay.
But the plasma contains both anti-A and anti-B antibodies,
Okay.
making type O individuals universal donors. Got it.
So that means that type A can safely receive blood from type A or type O donors.
Okay.
Type B can receive from type B or type O.
Right.
Type AB, they can receive from AB, or O.
That's right.
And type O, they can only receive from type O donors.
Okay.
For plasma transfusions, those rules are essentially reversed.
Got it. It really is a puzzle.
It is a puzzle, yeah.
Where those antigens on the red blood cells and then the antibodies have to match.
They do.
Otherwise, you can get a very dangerous reaction.
That's right.
What about Rh factor? How does that play into it?
Okay, so Rh factor is another important antigen.
Okay.
And it can be present on the surface of red blood cells.
Right.
So if you have the antigen, you're referred to as Rh positive.
Okay.
If you don't, you're Rh negative.
Right.
So when it comes to red blood cell transfusions, Rh negative recipients should only receive Rh negative blood.
Okay.
If an Rh negative person receives Rh positive blood, their immune system can recognize that Rh antigen as foreign and then start making antibodies against it.
Okay.
And this is particularly important for women
Right.
who are Rh negative and of childbearing age.
Right.
Because it can cause complications in subsequent pregnancies.
Yeah.
If the baby is Rh positive,
Right.
Rh positive recipients, on the other hand, they can safely receive either Rh positive or Rh negative blood.
Right.
Without that risk.
So careful matching is key.
It is.
Okay, so let's say we've got a patient who needs a transfusion.
Okay.
We're going to transfuse them with packed red blood cells.
Okay.
What are some of the, really important principles that guide that administration?
Okay. So PRBCs, they must always be administered through a special blood filter.
Okay.
And that's to remove any potential clots or debris that might be in there.
Right.
It is absolutely crucial to make sure that the blood is compatible with the recipient's ABO and RH.
Right.
And we got to confirm that.
Right.
And then once a unit of blood leaves the blood bank, it's got a limited lifespan
Okay.
for infusion, which is typically around 4 hours.
Okay.
And that's to minimize bacterial growth.
Right.
A standard unit of PRBCs, it usually infuses over 2 to 3 hours. But it can never exceed 4 hours from the time it's removed from that controlled refrigeration.
Okay.
And it's also important to remember that PRBCs are primarily indicated for increasing that oxygen carrying capacity of the blood.
Right.
So usually in cases of anemia or blood loss,
Right.
they're not intended for just increasing blood volume.
Okay.
Or, just to bump up the hemoglobin or hematocrit levels without, thinking about the patient's overall condition and other factors.
It's not a cure-all for everything.
No, it's not.
Okay, what about platelet transfusions? What are the big considerations for that?
Okay, so platelets, they also require administration through a filter.
Okay.
And we use a new filter for each unit transfused.
Okay.
ABO, it's preferred. And can sometimes improve the response to the transfusion.
Right.
But it's not an absolute requirement like it is with red blood cells.
Okay.
The Rh factor is particularly important for Rh negative women, especially those of childbearing potential.
Right.
Because they should ideally receive Rh negative platelets to prevent sensitization, which could cause problems down the road.
Got it.
Platelets typically infuse pretty quickly.
Okay.
Compared to red blood cells.
Okay.
Usually like 30 to 60 minutes per dose.
Okay.
But it's important to note that they might not be very effective in patients who have conditions that cause a rapid destruction of platelets.
Got it.
So, like in some autoimmune disorders.
Right.
Unless they're experiencing really severe life-threatening bleeding.
Okay. So that's platelets.
Yeah.
What about plasma?
Okay, so for plasma, again, a filter.
Okay.
The dosage is calculated based on the patient's weight.
Okay.
ABO compatibility is necessary, but again, an exact match is not required. A key point to remember with plasma is that it's stored frozen.
Oh, okay.
And it needs to be thawed before it can be given to the patient.
Interesting.
Rh factor is not really a concern with plasma transfusions because it primarily contains antibodies, not those Rh antigens.
Right.
Plasma can be infused more rapidly than packed red blood cells.
Okay.
But again, the rate depends on the situation and the patient's tolerance.
Got it.
And we don't typically give plasma for solely increasing blood volume or for isolated deficiencies of a single clotting factor.
Okay.
When we've got more targeted treatments available.
Like specific factor concentrates.
Exactly.
Okay, and then finally, albumin.
Okay, so albumin administration has a few specific things that we have to consider.
Okay.
It doesn't require a standard blood filter.
Okay.
However, the tubing often needs a venting system to prevent foaming and pressure buildup.
Okay.
Albumin solutions, they're generally compatible with isotonic fluids,
Right.
so like your normal saline. The rate of infusion depends on the concentration, so whether it's 5% or 25%. Host speaker.